Okay, so in full transparency, these procedures of this recipe were taken from the YouTube channel Bake with Jack. And if you don't already follow him, do yourself a favor. Jack is a world of knowledge in all things bakery related. Now to start off, tonight I'm feeding a starter to use in the morning for my dough. And to do this, I'm mixing 25 grams of starter with 55 grams of room temperature water and 55 grams of bread flour. And I will let that ferment overnight at room temperature. I know what you might be thinking. Can't I just use all-purpose flour? And the answer here is no. Bread flour produces baked goods with more structure and chew than all-purpose flour. As all-purpose only has a protein content of 10 to 12% versus 12 to 14% of bread, yes, that little 2 to 4% makes a huge difference. All-purpose flour produces tender baked goods, ideal for cakes, muffins, biscuits, pie crusts, etc., while bread flour, well, is used for making bread. Now that it's morning and the birds are chirping and the first day of making bread can begin. To start off, we're going to mix 307 grams of room temperature water with 117 grams of our yeast mixture. And if you're quick with your math, that gives us about 18 grams of leftover starter. You can repeat this feeding cycle that we did last night with the extra starter and repeat this daily if you're into having a daily bread. But I digress. To this, we're going to add 456 grams of bread flour and 10 grams of salt. We're going to mix this with a wooden spoon until most of all the flour has absorbed the water. Then we're going to ditch the spoon, and with a wet or damp hand, we're going to pinch and knead for roughly 1 to 2 minutes, and then let it rest for 15 minutes. If you live in a dry climate, having a damp, warm towel to cover your dough with will keep it from drying out. After the 15 minutes of resting, we're going to stretch and fold our dough about 5 to 6 times and then cover it again and let it rest for another 15 minutes. After our second 15-minute rest, I'm going to spray lightly a little bit of water on my countertop to prevent any type of sticking. And with wet or damp hands, I'm going to stretch my dough out to a rough 14 to 16 inch circle. Now I'm going to fold this dough sort of like a letter going into an envelope. A third of the way down, a third of the way up, and then I'm going to bring the sides in, fold the corners up until I get a rough shape of a ball. And now it's time to cover this up and let it bulk ferment for 6 to 8 hours. You may find your dough to be a little bit sticky, and that's normal. Damp hands and a bench scrape are going to be your best friends here. We are roughly going to shape our dough into a ball by pulling up the sides of the dough to the center. Then we will flip the dough over. Working quickly, we're going to keep our pinkies on the counter and drag the dough towards us. This is going to help bring the dough closed on the bottom. Then we're going to lightly dust our dough and flip it over into our basket. Now we want to let this proof for 1 hour at room temperature. Then we're going to cover that up with a damp towel and place it in our refrigerator overnight. Now on to day 2 of our sourdough bread. We want to preheat our oven equipped with a baking stone at 425 degrees Fahrenheit for 1 hour while our dough comes to room temperature. Now my lamb skills aren't that great, but basically what we are doing is creating a weak spot in our dough, and this is where we get that iconic oven spring and look to a sourdough. I'm going to place my dough directly on the stone and cover it for the first 20 minutes of the baking time. You can also do this with a Dutch oven and the lid on. Now I'm going to remove this stock pot or the lid if you're using a Dutch oven, and I'm going to let this cook for an additional 30 minutes. Now I know, this looks awesome. You want to dive into it right away, but let it rest for at least 1 hour before you cut into it.